Cassandra.
Hey, Jody, we're just letting Deb get logged in. We'll be ready in just a sec.
That's what I was questioning.
Okay, ready to go.
Wonderful. Good afternoon. It is 4:32 on July 27th, 2023, and I call this Historic Preservation Commission meeting to order. Our first order of business is roll call. Blaine Johnson, Pam Jagosh, Jack Keller,
Here.
Patrick Giddings,
Here.
Jody Alt, present. Destiny Hart, Deborah Pitts,
Present.
And
Wonderful.
Madam Vice Chair,
Welcome
as we've just
all.
done the roll call, I did have just one thing to let you all know. You may have seen that the city announced an open seat on the commission, and this is because Destiny's term is expiring, and she let me know that she would not be renewing. So we are looking for another historic preservation commissioner. If you know anyone, please spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you. Next order is adoption of agenda.
I move to adopt agenda.
Second.
It has been moved by Jack Keller and seconded that we adopt the agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion. Approval of the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
It has been moved by Jack Keller and seconded that we approve the minutes of the meeting of June 22nd. Say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next order of business is the approval of the monthly financial statement.
I move to approve the monthly financial statement.
Second that.
Moved by Jack Keller and seconded that we approve the monthly financial statement. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The motion carries. We now have old business. Cassandra, do you have any updates, or I guess it's Patrick, do you have updates for us on the historic preservation plan?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I'm actually going to let Patrick Giddings is leading this discussion. Or unless you want me to start something, Pat.
No, that's fine. Can we bring up?
Commissioner Giddings is muted, I think. At least on the Zoom.
There, can you hear me now?
Yes, but it's still a little quiet. So if you could speak loudly, that would be great.
Cassandra is going to bring up a document that I created and that we've worked on. It's a project plan that has information, tentative information. And so my hope tonight was that we could review that document and have a discussion about the different elements of it and maybe come to a consensus on whether we think this is the right direction that we want to go or not. So as soon as we get that document up, then we can go ahead and start on the review process.
I need just a minute to find it, and I do want to note that it's attached to everyone's agenda. So if you want to bring it up through the agenda, it's available there too.
While Cassandra is bringing that up, maybe I'll just touch briefly on what this document is. My background, I'm a project manager. I'm retired now, but I was a project manager for many years. And this is a project scope and requirements document. Hopefully you're all seeing it on your screen now. But this document is intent is to put in writing what the scope is and what our requirements are. I would like to review this. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I would like to review it with everybody and have enough time maybe to have some conversation here too. So it's in sections 1 through 9, plus there's an annex at the end. Am I able to? No, just you. Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and go to section 1. And that's just, we'll start there. This background is just a short paragraph that says what the background of our historic preservation plan is. That we had one in 2014, that it's 10 years old, or it's soon going to be 10 years old. And the State Historic Preservation Office has recommended that we update the plan every 10 years, that they often fund grants to pay the costs. And so it's in our interest now to look at either updating the plan that we have or creating a whole new plan. So section 2 pertains to the goals and the project closing criteria. And briefly what that is, it lays out that our goal is to update the existing Meridian Historic Preservation Plan 2014. The new plan will be effective for 10 years and meet the requirements of the Certified Local Government Program, as well as other of our own requirements. To accomplish the goal, the city will contract with a professional consultant who's trained and experienced in this area. There are a set of qualifications for that. I don't have those in this document yet, but they'll be included in this document. The consultant works with the city, the Historic Preservation Commission, and they can deliver a complete historic preservation plan that meets all the requirements. They do that within the budget that we have, and they deliver it in the agreed upon time period. Once those goals are accomplished, that's when this project would be complete. So the delivery units and services are section 2.1. Let me stop though. Does anybody have any comment or concerns or questions about the first part? A 2.1 is delivery units and services. All this means is this is what the consultant will deliver to us. They'll deliver to us a historic preservation plan. They'll work with the city, they'll work with us to develop a complete historic preservation plan per the requirements that we give them. They'll provide monthly progress reports. That'll be something that will be agreed to in the contract that we have with the consultant. There should also be checkpoint reports where when they meet certain milestones, certain major milestones, then they'll make a presentation directly to us when they reach those agreed upon milestones. During the process of the work, the consultant is likely going to produce documents and is likely going to compile data related to this project. All of that needs to become the property of the city. And then at the end of the project, when they deliver the completed document to us, then they would present a summary report of all the work that they've completed in the historic preservation plan. Any comments or questions on that? All right. The next is a tentative schedule. Now, this is a 50,000-foot view schedule, and it's not the schedule that a consultant would work from. This is simply a schedule that Cassandra put together that shows at a 50,000-foot level what we're going to be working on in the approximate timeframes that we're going to be working on it on. We already know that we're going to have to make a change or two to this. We've learned some things since this was written, but this basically gives the real high level time frame, meaning that we're basically starting the project this month in July of 2023, and we need to have it completed by, I believe it's sometime in 2026. That's if everything goes according to plan. It would be great if it, if it were to complete before that, but that's the time scheduling that we're giving ourselves for that. Comments or questions? All right. So the project budget, as you can see, is not complete. We believe that the consultant will be somewhere around the neighborhood of $15,000. We're going to do some additional homework and see if we can either verify that or find out that that's not true. There's two other categories of project budget that we'll look at. One is match and in kind. And for the most part, that's our time as commissioners. The other cost that would be included in this project would be the cost for city staff. There are rates for both our time and for city staff time, but we need to do some additional homework in order to get some good estimates of the amount of time that it's going to take that we're all going to put in. Any questions or comments on budget? All right.
Sorry, Commissioner Giddings, and as we're talking about the budget, maybe this is in detail later, I'm trying to remember, but the Historic Preservation Commission is planning on applying for a grant because there's not enough funding to cover this currently, and the commission is very likely to receive a grant from the State Historic Preservation Office, as they kind of discussed in one of the previous meetings. The Historic Preservation Commission does have some funding, so some of that could also be a match for the grant to leverage some funds. Let me know if any of that was unclear.
And we can discuss that a little further when we get into the risks and the constraints and all of that also. We'll touch on that again.
Sorry if I was jumping ahead potentially.
No, you're fine. So section 3 is about scope. So that's jargon, that's my language. But what scope is, it's really the boundaries of the project. When you start a project like this or any kind of a project, you should always define what the scope is. That means what it is that just means what it is you're trying to accomplish. What is it that you're trying to do? And you should clarify all of the aspects that belong to the project and things that may be changed if you know that. But in general, when you start a project, you should determine what the scope is, and then you should try and stick with that scope and not have changes. If you do wind up with unexpected changes in any project, whether it's a small project or a large project, those changes can impact what the cost is and the amount of time that it takes and the amount of people that it takes. So it's in everyone's best interest if we define what the scope of this project is and then stick with that. And this has a pretty limited scope, so it should be fairly easy for us to define the scope and stick with what that scope is. And so section 3.1 is where we begin to define what that scope is. So 3.1 starts with processes considered. The first process here is to update the existing Historic Preservation Plan 2014 with a new plan that meets all the listed requirements. And we'll get to the listed requirements later. I put a note in here. It says the idea is to update the existing 2014 plan to make it more robust and meet the needs of the city for the next 10 years. And we should probably have that conversation, whether that's what we want to do or whether we want to have a consultant create a 100% new historic preservation plan from scratch. To my way of thinking, it seems like we have a pretty good plan. It's just dated and it needs to be a lot more robust than it is. So that was why I put in here to update the existing historic preservation plan with a new plan that meets all the listed requirements. The other processes considered are to survey the community and other interested stakeholders to ascertain interest in historic preservation. SHPO had made a presentation to us at a previous meeting, and this was one of the things that they said that was advantageous, something that was desirable in a historic preservation plan, was to survey outside partners and then work with other partners as needed to document survey results into the plan. Which brings us to 3.2, which is the scope of the organization, meaning the people that are going to be involved in this. So the organizational units that will be considered within the city of Meridian is the purchasing department, of course, us as the HPC, the Meridian Arts and Culture Coordinator, Cassandra, and the Meridian City Planning Department. Outside of our organization, there are some organizations that we'll also want to work with. And those include whoever it is that we contract with to be the consultant, Meridian Library District History Center, Ada County Historic Preservation Commission, SHPO, and the general public. And there may be more. If any of you that are here on this call think of any more, then we can certainly add those to the list. Any comments on section 3 on scope? Okay, section 4 has to do with assumptions, constraints, and external dependencies. Assumptions are just what we assume is going to happen, the things that we assume we're going to need. We're going to need a new updated Meridian Historic Preservation Plan. We assume that the City Council is going to approve moving forward with the project once we provide them with all of the information that they need to make a decision. We also assume that the City of Meridian is going to need to contract with a qualified consultant to create the new plan. And then constraints. One of the constraints we're going to have is that there are few qualified consultants. I think we know of 3 right now that SHPO has given us the names of. These consultants live in what I think is probably a pretty small universe. I don't think there's a lot of consultants out there. I'm sure that nationwide there is a fair number of people that are qualified to do this kind of work, but there are few qualified consultants that we know of right now. And so that could be a constraint. And external dependencies, one of the big dependencies that we're going to have is that we're going to be dependent on a grant from SHPO. If we don't get the grant from SHPO, that's going to be a big problem, because I don't think there's enough money in our budget to do this project without that grant. Another constraint that we have is the consultant may not be able to complete the work on time. And if they don't complete the work on time, that could affect our ability to have our grant also. And then the last one is the city's going to rely on HPC commissioners to oversee the consultant and ensure that a quality product is produced. Of course, the city is also going to have a hand in this too, but as historic preservation commissioners, we're all volunteers. And so, we all have things going on too. And it can be a constraint if there's a lot to do and we just don't have the time to do it. I hope that makes sense what I'm saying here, but any questions or comments on section 4?
Commissioner Giddings, just a note, as you said, that the city does rely on the Historic Preservation Commission to be the subject matter experts. So yes, the city does rely on your information and expertise and experience and thoughts to, as you wrote in this, to ensure that a quality product is, that this is a good historic preservation plan.
Great. All right. So the next section 5 is the responsibility of the consultant. So 5.1 is jobs and tasks. We know that the consultant is going to create a project schedule. Once the city and the consultant have entered into a contractual agreement, part of that agreement is going to be that the consultant has to create a project schedule. Project schedules, to be really effective, have to include concrete and measurable deliverables, and they also should include timelines so that projects don't last forever. Also, the consultant would perform a SWOT analysis for the project. Now, this is something that's up for our discussion, but let me explain for those of you who don't know what a SWOT analysis is. When SHPO was here and made their presentation to us, they had mentioned a SWOT analysis. So a SWOT analysis, SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And a SWOT analysis is used by organizations in both private and public sector when they perform strategic planning and when they do organizational design planning. So strengths and weaknesses are internal. What are the strengths and weaknesses that we have with regards to historic preservation? What are the strengths and weaknesses that the city has when it comes to historic preservation? Opportunities and threats are external. They're things that come from the outside. What opportunities do we have on the outside? Are there partners that we could be working with that we don't know about? Are there threats, things that we just don't know about? A consultant would come in, and when he performs this SWOT analysis, he would report back to us on the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. And this SWOT analysis would become part of the historic preservation plan. So I hope that makes sense. I'm a big fan of these, especially when it comes to things like strategic planning. And I think that it would fit in really well with our historic preservation plan. The next line is the consultant in the city will develop a payment schedule. That isn't something that we as commissioners, I think, have too much to do with, but just as a point of knowledge, these payment schedules are deliverable based. So on the first line, I'd put consultant creates a project schedule that includes concrete and measurable deliverables. Well, he gets paid based on how he delivers these items. And so the last line is the consultant will deliver regular status updates. This would be reported during the monthly commissioners meeting. Frequency could be a part of the contract negotiation. I would think that we would want to touch on it every month. I don't know that we would necessarily have an in-depth report from a consultant every single month. Well, that's 5.1, jobs and tasks. 5.2 has to do with resources and staffing. And there's really only one thing on here. The consultant would need to inform us if they had any staffing additions or reductions. We won't know until we get a consultant, whether the individual will be working by himself, whether he's part of a firm where there'll be a team of people working on the project or not. That's something that we can't know until after we get the contract. But once the contract is made, we should know who's on the consultant's team, whether it's one individual or whether it's multiple people. And if there's any changes to that, then that consultant should let us know. Any questions or comments on section 5? All right, section 6. Oh,
Am I on?
yep.
Oh, there I am. When I was looking at some of the other cities' plans, I thought that we probably, and I reviewed this, I thought that we probably, and you probably have put this in somewhere and I missed it, but we really have to say, okay, what really do we want this plan to be? Because the plans that, like, there were different plans from different cities. I really looked at Napa a lot, and there was other ones. And, you know, what are we interested in having it be? Do we want them to identify historic properties? Do we want a survey? Do we want a history? I mean, a lot of them had histories of the entire city, and I'm thinking, wow, you're going to pay for that. You know, what is it in the end? What do we want this plan to look like? And I guess that's what the commission has to come up with, that these are the, you know, the things that we want the consultant to come up with. Either it seems like everybody did a survey, you know, a survey, and that they would then tell us exactly what was that we expect. And then I noticed in some of the plans that they definitely had what each group would do. But I felt that a lot of the deliverables or timeframes or the people, it was really big. And so I was just wondering if we're gonna all sit down as a commission or a committee or whatever and really sit down and say, this is really when at the end of the day, this is what we want our plan to contain.
I think you bring up some really good points there. Some of what you're bringing up, we're going to touch on a little later in this document, but the part about, and there's several good points there. You had mentioned how extensive the histories were in some of the other plans that you had looked at. I had looked at that too. And actually, when I look at our historic preservation plan from 2014, I look at the history and I think that's really good. And so earlier when I had mentioned, do we just update what we have? That's kind of what I had in mind. Instead of completely reinventing the wheel, let's take what we really love about the preservation plan from 2014 and keep that rather than paying a consultant to recreate that, you know, from scratch. So I think I'm totally in agreement with you there. The other thing on what you were alluding to is what I call requirements. We have a section in here in requirements, and I hope that we definitely have some time that we can talk about those requirements, because I think you're right on when you say we need to be fairly specific. We can tell a consultant what we want. How they do that is their business, right? That's what we're hiring them for. That's what we're paying them for, is for how they do that. But we need to be able to tell them exactly what it is that we want. There's a section a little later on, and we can make that section, we can make that more granular if we want to, or we can leave it like it is and then negotiate or talk with the consultant once they're chosen. There's different ways of doing that. But I think that your points are exactly right on. I totally agree with that. Anyone else have anything for section 5? All right, section 6. Critical success factors include the city has to release an RFP to hire a consultant. That has to be done. The HPC, along with the city, has to select a qualified consultant. That has to be done. The city has to successfully apply for and be awarded a SHPO grant. That's a critical success factor. We'll talk a little more about that later. The city council must approve the grant, a budget amendment, and the contractor's agreement for the project to move forward. That will have to happen. And then the consultant has to complete the work, and they have to deliver the new historic preservation plan before the SHPO grant expires. Those are all the critical success factors. And there may be more. I haven't thought of them yet. So if anybody has any thoughts about that, this would be a good time. All right, move on to section 7. Section 7 is risks. Anytime you do a project, whether it's a big project or a small project, you have risks. I just outlined some of the things that came to mind. I'll bet if we all sat down over coffee, we could probably come up with 100 risks. But these are things that I think might are worthwhile documenting. So the first risk is no consultant successfully responds to the RFP. What if we put out an RFP and everybody who could respond to it is booked up for the next 4 years? They might choose not to respond. Then we'd have to kind of go back to the drawing board. We might have to cast a wider net and try and find consultants further afield. The next one is the city is unsuccessful in obtaining a grant from SHPO. So if that were to happen, then the city would have to foot the bill, or they'd have to cancel the project, or I didn't put it on here, or delay the project for a year until we had a chance to apply for another grant. The next one's the city council doesn't approve the project. That would basically mean that the project would be over if the city council doesn't approve it. The next one is the consultant backs out of the contract mid-project. You wouldn't think that that would be something that would happen, but I've seen that happen with consultants and with contractors. And you just don't know what could happen, especially if you hire a consultant and he's a one-person show. What happens if that individual gets sick? They might have to back out of a contract. You just don't know. So that's a risk that if that were to happen, then the city and the HPC would need to evaluate the next steps and what to do to move forward. Things that would probably determine that would be how far along are we? Are we just getting started? Are we almost finished? Those are all things that would be part of the risk analysis if that were to happen. The next thing on the list is the grant expires prior to the delivery of the new historic preservation plan. If that were to happen and there was unpaid bills with the consultant, then the city might wind up being on the hook for whatever, for whatever didn't get used out of the grant funds before the grant expired. And like I said, there's probably more. Sandra, is there another one on the list? Nope, there isn't. Does anyone have any comments, any additional risks that are high enough that we should put them on this list? Right. Section 8, we don't really need to cover. It's valid change request toward project scope. This is something that would be filled out in the future if after we started the project, we found out that we needed to make some changes, some things that we forgot, some things that we were required to do that we didn't know we were required to do. Those would be change requests and they would be recorded here. Section 9. This is the one where we get into the requirements, Deborah, as you were talking about. So I hope that we can have some conversation here about requirements. This list came from our existing historic preservation plan, and the 5 items that are in yellow there that say new, those are things that we identified out of other historic preservation plans and things that when SHPO presented to us, they had mentioned things. But if you look at this bullet point list and you compare it with our existing historic preservation plan, the first bullet points all coincide. They come right from the 2014 plan. Then when you get to the new one, the first new one is current historic preservation tools and conditions. That's where the SWOT analysis comes in. The next one is a summary of issues and concerns from the public, qualified experts, the HPC, county and city government boards, and Idaho SHPO. That would be a whole new section. Then the next new one is an implementation plan with priorities and resources, kind of getting to what you were saying, Deborah. Have a implementation plan that is it's maybe more concrete and measurable. Reference information, maps and survey results, all things that SHPO had said would be advantageous and that modern historic preservation plans have, that ours would benefit from having. And then the last two are two that are already in, and that's a survey of the National Register of Historic Places nomination forms and the historic sites inventory. And so I'd like to pause here and stop talking and hopefully have a conversation. If there's some additional requirements, then we should talk about those and maybe add them to the list. I would say one thing, that requirements are what we need to have happen, not how they need to be done. And so yeah, I'll stop talking for a minute and we'll have a conversation about this.
Is the maps and survey results, is that, is a survey what would be sent out to the city of Meridian citizens? Or is that something else?
Survey results could definitely be that, right? Excuse me, yes.
I mean, all the plans I saw, they had lots of, they had meetings, they had surveys, they had a lot of reaching out to the community, which I thought was great to get them involved. I think the one thing that probably needs to be done the most, and probably maybe a smaller committee, maybe is just to really draw out the requirements in much more detail so that the RFP, I mean, really it could be the basis for the RFP. So the consultant really could come back and say, yes, I can or can't do it. And I thought that the numbers were more like 20 to 25,000 as opposed to 15,000, but maybe I got that wrong. So that the consultants, that's about what they charge. But I really think we need to flush out the requirements, because when I was in consulting, I mean, that was where we came back on the RFP and we said, yes, we can deliver this for this amount. And it was, and the requirements were what drove our decision as to how much to charge. And the requirements have to be really fleshed out, I think, in an RFP, so that the consultant really can give us a really concrete answer. And of course, and I agree, one of the biggest risks we have is, can the consultant, if we get a grant from SHPO, can the consultant complete the contract, complete the plan within that time frame?
Right.
Because if they couldn't, if they didn't, then the city of Meridian is stuck for that amount. Whoa, that wouldn't be good. So, but that's where I think that either we need a smaller committee or we just discuss it in among the whole commission, the exact requirements, so we can put out an RFP that really is concrete and detailed.
Well, that's been brought up before, having a subcommittee, and I think that might be a good idea. I don't know that we would need a subcommittee after the RFP was led. I think the whole commission would be able to be involved in it. But I think maybe a subcommittee is a good idea to do exactly what you said, to work on the RFP. I've tried to look at RFPs, and Cassandra's been really helpful. I haven't really had much luck finding anything that's really detailed yet. But in my experience, RFPs need to be fairly detailed too, because if they're not fairly detailed, then you can't really hold your consultant accountable for what you've contracted them to do. So having a subcommittee is something that might be a good idea. Now, I'm not sure how many people that should be, whether it's 2 or 3 people, but I think that is something that we should consider. Might be something we should consider here today, is determining whether or not we should have a subcommittee.
Madam Vice Chair and
Commissioner
Commissioner
Giddings.
Giddings. We have legal here, Emily Kane, because I'm not quite sure with HPC's subcommittee rules, because I know the president can, I think as a commission, Emily, can they create a subcommittee now? Oh, her video might not be working.
Sorry, HPC has the standard bylaws that allow the president to establish a committee. So the vice president could do that today because she's vested with all the powers of the president. Or you could wait, give it a little time, and collaborate with the president.
Okay.
And Madam Chair and Commissioners, one other thing about the subcommittees is that a quorum of the historic preservation cannot be present. A quorum is 4 members, so a subcommittee could be 2 to 3 members, but not 4.
We have volunteers for this committee.
Madam Vice President said, do we have volunteers for such a committee?
I'd be willing to work on it.
And of course I will.
So then let's go ahead and establish that subcommittee and have those, and if Mr. President would like to join, we have him at that time, but let's get started on this and get this subcommittee going.
Madam Vice Chair, unfortunately, you're breaking up just a little bit. If I understand, I think that you said that we could have a committee of the commissioners interested, which are Patrick Giddings and Deborah Pitts. Is that what you said?
Yes, and ask would to join or work with them.
Shoot, you're cutting out fairly quite a bit. I don't think we quite understood. You could also type it into the chat and I could read it.
Cassandra, can you hear me now?
Yes, that is much better.
Sorry about that. I'll shut off my video. I apologize for that. Maybe we can do it. What I said was, yes, let's establish the committee. And if Mr. President would like to join when he comes, we have that option.
Emily, do we need a motion or anything for that?
You know, not necessarily. Let's say no, because it's an act of the chair or the vice chair.
Correct.
Good question.
Thank you. Okay, so I will send out an email to look at good dates and times, and then the subcommittee could really go over some of those details for the deliverable.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, let's move on to reports. Cassandra, do you have a recap of the Orchids and Onions Award?
Thanks, Madam Vice Chair. I just wanted to go back. Was there anything else, Commissioner Giddings, that you wanted to go over in the?
No, I think that pretty much summed it all up. The only thing that was left on here was the glossary and abbreviations and then references. So so I think we covered it.
Great, thank you. So the Orchids and Onions, as a recap, so Hidden Gem Events did win an award. I was unable to attend, but Commissioner Gittens was able to go. Do you want to share anything about the event?
Yeah, it was a great event. I had never been to one of those before. I didn't even actually know what it was until this year. I thought it was a terrific event. I thought there was a lot of people there who were very deserving. And I think the Talleth House and Elizabeth Burgess were very, very deserving of that. It was kind of fun to be there and to watch all of that unfold. I know that I was able to sit at the table with some different people, and there's a lot of people from Preservation Idaho who are pretty passionate about history. I sat with one couple who knew an awful lot about Meridian, even though they don't even actually live in Meridian. So I thought it was time well spent. I'm really glad that I went, and I appreciate that opportunity.
Thank you. Do we have any project updates? Cassandra?
Thank you. Yes, I do have some updates. So Eggers Farmstead is the first one on there, and Blaine did send me an email, and I'm actually just going to read the email from him about the development. So this is from Blaine. It appears that the developer won't be able to keep either structures as part of the development. They have studied this from several directions, and they've come to the conclusion that we will not be able to keep the current structure in its current location. The structure will encroach over 22 feet into ACHD's required right-of-way for Vanguard Street. And if they were able to obtain a waiver of some sort from ACHD, the structure would impede their site entrance due to site distance limitations. It is, from their estimation, cost prohibitive to move the structure to another part of the site. They will be proposing construction of a monument at the intersection of Black Cat Road and Vanguard, which can be a tribute to the structure and contain an informational wall with photos or renderings of the original structure with the description and history provided. The developer will keep HPC updated on the status and design of the monument.
Wonderful, thank you.
Let me know if you have any questions about that. Related to the Eggers Farmstead and Black Cat development whole film, which is listed on this agenda item, they have been doing the 360 video document, or not video, still documentation in the website. So he he's completed the tour. He has a draft up on the website, so you can go to the website and kind of check it out. He's still working on it. And he's looking for more historical photos. I did send him to the library district, and he also kind of knows the owner of that property and was going to look for other photos. So you can check out the draft online. Not quite complete yet, but close. And
thank you.
Other updates, the Speedway nomination, no update there. SHPO said things are still on track and making progress on it, but nothing really other than that. And then for the TAG reconnaissance survey, they have finished the field work for phase 2, and they're working to complete the report and final details on the survey. They plan to submit the draft to us and to SHPO next week for review. So they're on track to complete by September. When I get that draft, I can send it out to everyone for review. They'll also send it to the State Historic Preservation Office for any changes on their survey. Thank you.
Wonderful. We're on track with a lot of things. Next topic is future meeting topics and discussion. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add to the agenda for, or any of the other future meetings? Okay, doesn't seem like it. Our next meeting will be August 24th, 2023. Does anyone else have anything to bring before this committee? Do we have a motion for adjournment?
I move to adjourn the meeting. Ooh, double.
It has been, do we have a second?
I second.
Okay, I did not catch who the motion was.
Deb Pitts.
Thank you, Deb. It has been moved by Deb Pitts and seconded that we adjourn this meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you so much for everything, guys.